Hey folks, how you doing? It's Don Grant, CTC, Cutting Tool Counselor, here with another exciting episode of In the Loop TV, sponsored by Harvey Performance Company. If you haven't yet, please, we would love it. Hit the subscribe, hit the like, share it, do all those good things. We love educating the public and you folks out there to be better cutting tool individuals. Thanks for joining me. Before we get started on this episode, I gotta say this, I have to say this. Helical Solutions, one of our known brands, high performance end mill, is now in Europe as of January. So if you are watching this and you are in Europe and you wanna try Helical Solutions, please find your local distributor, ask them to try Helical, and you will be happy you did. That's it, that's my sales pitch. I'm not gonna say anything else. We are on to educating. This one is going to be good. I'm going to teach you something that we use as application engineers in the field to make tools run better. That's what it's all about. And this episode, quite frankly, I'm going to turn you all into cutting tool Jedis, Jedi Masters. That's what this training is. We're going to talk about points of contact on an end mill and how that affects the performance. So come back right after this little intro, and we will talk about it. Well, thanks for coming back, folks. Thanks for joining me on this episode in the Loop TV. We are talking about points of contact. Points of contact on an end mill, which means how many times or how many points of that end mill as it's going all the way down the cutting edge are touching our material, and how does that affect how our end mill performs? This is crucial. I am telling you, this is crucial, and I'm going to teach you exactly how to determine how many points of contact you have in the material, how many you want in the material, and what effects that's actually causing when it's cutting. So stick around on this episode of In the Loop TV. So folks, as I always start these videos, let me just explain what I'm talking about with points of contact so we know where everything I say references, right? A point of contact is as we look at an end mill, and we're talking axial, okay? But there's points of contact axial, up and down, and there's also points of contact radial that you need to be aware of. What I'm talking about is how many of those cutting edges throughout an axial depth are engaged in your material at one time. That's what I'm talking about, okay? So you can have one point of contact, which means it's in the material and then it's out of the material. You can have 2 points of contact where 2 points are in the material at the same time, 3 points, 4 points, 5 points. I just want everybody to understand when I'm referencing points of contact, we're talking about how many of those cutting edges are in the material at the same time. That can be axial and that can be radial. Everybody understand that? Before we talk about ideal points of contact and how it affects your cutting tool, bingo. Let's go on to the next. So the first thing I want to point out is the worst situation for points of contact, and that is one, the number one. One is good if you're winning a race, if you're first, but in an end mill, it's not so good if you have 1 point of contact. Let me explain why. 1 point of contact actually means that we have one cutting edge in the material and one cutting edge out of the material. So it exits before another one comes in. Well, carbide, you have to understand, if you watched my last video, we talked about this a little bit. Carbide, you have to understand, is under load. It deflects. Deflection is the killer, right? So this whole thing with points of contact is we're trying to eliminate deflection. If we only put one tooth in cut and then have it exit before the other one enters, the deflection on the cutting tool goes up, bang, 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 bang. It's not good. And that's where we get the vibration. Gives you a bad finish if you're trying to finish, and it will not sustain life, okay? So 1 point of contact is always bad. So when we're looking at this, and if you take anything away from this video, is do whatever I support and say in this video to eliminate the 1 point of contact issue. So think about this, 1 point of contact, in, out, deflect, deflect, bounce, chatter, vibration, carbide's brittle, and it's going to chip. So we do not want one point of contact. So that being said, do we want 10 points of contact? Do we want 6 points of contact? Do we want 4 points of contact? We're going to get into that. But the more points of contact you have, the more tool pressure you have. I'm kind of going both sides of the spectrum. 1, bad. 10, bad, depending on what you're doing. Too much tool pressure is a problem as well. So we're really trying to get the optimal points of contact to stabilize the cutter, but not put extreme tool pressure on the cutter. So how do we do that? Points of contact are controlled by 3 things. They're controlled by 3 things. They're controlled by an axial depth, which means how far axially are you going into your material? That's going to control your contacts. That's number 1. Number 2 is they're controlled by your radial step over. The more you're engaged, the more that other tooth comes around and hits. So your radial step over is going to control your points of contact. The last thing that's going to control your points of contact is going to be your helix angle. Helix angle is the angle off a center line, which creates a shear angle, creates different cutting action on that. Your helix angle is going to determine that. So we're looking at an axial depth, we're looking at a radial step over, and we're looking at the Hey folks, hold on, pause the video. He's forgetting one most important thing. Don't know why he's forgetting it. It is flute count. Flute count. Obviously, the more flutes you have, the more points of contact. The less flutes you have, the less points of contact, which you can really use flute count to control how many points of contact. Not sure why he didn't do that, but you don't need to put comments in there. I got you. All right, video can continue. Nice face, by the way. To control how many points of contact we want to put in our material to stabilize that cutter. So all this conversation is in an axial plane, right? We can control the majority of it by moving our axial up and down. Now that's going to be determined by the tool path that you pick, right? If it's dynamic, where you're going a high axial, it's also going to be determined by what your part looks like. So there's variables to this, but no matter what your part looks like and what your tool path looks like, you need to understand this, do the math. We can help with that. Just call your local application engineer. We are very good at putting optimal points of contact in the tool path. As a matter of fact, we suggest that when we give you speeds and feeds on axial and radial. We take account to that. Now you're going to learn it though. So we want to make sure that our axial, our radial step over, and our helix angle, which is determined by the material specific, is optimal to have the right points of contact. So what is optimal? What is an optimal points of contact? Well, I'm going to tell you this. Did you see that? I almost fell over there for a second. So the optimal points of contact is a minimum of 2. I want 2 in there, which means when one exits, you better have that other one already in the material, because when you have 2 in there, when you're making a chip, believe it or not, it hugs the material and it sucks it into the material so it doesn't deflect. So I want a minimum of 2, and I probably want a maximum of 4 or 5. That's what I'm shooting for in order to stabilize the cutter and give you the best performance. So everything that I just explained is in an axial fashion. Believe it or not, there are points of contact in a radial fashion. The way I look at it is you can have axial, which means I'm going to change my axial depth of cut to get more than 1 point of contact. I'm going to change my radial step over to get more than 1 point of contact. And I'm going to make sure I got the optimal helix angle, which makes a difference. If you're asking me, where would radial come in? Well, let's say I was doing a traditional tool path. Traditional is not HEM, and I'm taking a light axial depth. Now I can control my points of contact by taking a larger radial. The more I step over that radial, I am going to have one tooth before it exits. I'm going to have another tooth in the material. That's going to stabilize your cutter. And I am telling you, from me to you, cutting tool counselor, in order to become a cutting tool Jedi, you need to understand that 1 tooth in cut, bad. 2 tooth in cut, good, very good. 3, extremely good. 4, skirting with tool pressure. 5, careful, Careful, maybe for finishing. But in order to be really good at optimizing your cutting tool, be conscious of how many points of contact you're making. Make sure you're stabilizing that cutter. Make sure that tool isn't bouncing back, and you will be extremely successful with the way you are optimizing your tool paths. Be mindful of your points of contact in your material, and I'll tell you what, you're going to become a better cutting tool Jedi. That's what I say. I'm overusing the word Jedi, I think, on this one. But you know what? Maybe we'll start a program, Cutting Tool Jedi. It's a 6-month program, $29.95. You can get it. You'll get a certificate at the end. We'll turn you into a Cutting Tool Jedi. I don't know. Follow along for details. That's what we need to be conscious of, is points of contact. Hey folks, that's it. Thanks for joining me on this episode of In the Loop TV. It's points of contact. It's very important to understand. You take all these videos, you watch them, you put them all together, and there you have the facts of life. No, you don't. You have great cutting tool knowledge, and you can apply them a little bit better at the spindle. Thanks for joining me. But before I go, you know I have to say it. There's 3 guarantees in life, folks: death, taxes, and spring passes. Have a great rest of your week.